Ahoy there, my children of the watch. Welcome to Star Wars Transmissions Weekly Q&A. I'm your boy Dan, and we've got some really fun and awesome questions to dive into. So let's get right to it. For our first question, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Umbre Militos asks, it seems clear that Thrawn is making secret moves in The Mandalorian. Would you be opposed to covering what he may be up to? Love this question. Love me some Thrawn. Let's dive into it. So it hasn't officially been stated that Thrawn is making any kind of moves in The Mandalorian. We don't know if he's going, officially, we don't know if he's going to take part in the story that is currently happening in The Mandalorian. Excuse me. But if we remember back in season 2 of The Mandalorian, we knew Ahsoka was looking for Thrawn, planting those seeds that Thrawn is going to eventually appear at some point. I think in the very least The Mandalorian, but most likely he's going to appear in Ahsoka and possibly any other live action Disney Plus series that are going to take place during the same time period that The Mandalorian is taking place in, which is that 8 to 10 ABY time frame. So I think the biggest thing that Thrawn is doing is he's working on consolidating his power, absorbing the many factions of the splintered empire back under his control. So after the Galactic Concordance was signed following the Battle of Jakku, so the Battle of Jakku took place in 5 BBY. We saw that in Battlefront 2, and that basically ended the Galactic Civil War. The Empire was pretty much crushed by that point. So the Galactic Concordance, which was the peace treaty between the Empire and the New Republic, that gets signed. The Galactic Civil War is officially ended. Many former members of the Empire escaped into the unknown regions, forming what would eventually become the First Order. Now, there were members of the Imperial leadership that either didn't make it to or weren't selected to escape into the unknown regions. They can continue to persist in the form of Imperial holdouts. And then those fragments of the Empire soon gained foothold on distant planets in the Outer Rim. So they started to operate in the Outer Rim territories, which is what we see in The Mandalorian. We see that the Empire has a presence in the Outer Rim that the New Republic is struggling to maintain a grip of. Right? So we've got this fragment of Imperial forces hanging out in the Outer Rim. Some of them become warlords. So some of the Imperial leadership that didn't go to the Outer Rim, they become warlords. Remnant stormtroopers that are still hanging out in the Outer Rim, they dissolved into like mercenary bands, and they wound up joining up with these ex-Imperial leaders, Moffs, admirals, whomever didn't make it into the unknown regions. They basically became warlords that had these mercenary group of former stormtroopers operating with them. Sonia, welcome to the chat. Glad you're joining us. Now, this is basically what we're seeing in The Mandalorian with Moff Gideon, right? We see Moff Gideon doing shady stuff in the Outer Rim in season 1 and in season 2. We see the Imperial remnant that's taking place during this time period. And again, the New Republic was really struggling to maintain order during that point in time because they're a newly formed government. They're still trying to figure out what that government is, what it looks like, how it's going to operate. And as we see with like Carasynthia and what's his name, Wolf Trapper, the two New Republic X-wing fighters, right? We see that they're trying to provide some sort of semblance of like a security force or some sort of New Republic presence in the Outer Rim, but only a few of those are operating in that point in the Outer Rim. And think about how big the Outer Rim is. It's a very expansive region. So the New Republic really struggles with maintaining order during that time period, which is why we're able to see the rise of this Imperial remnant during this time period. So if we look at Thrawn's story in Legends and kind of use that to figure out what might Lucasfilm pluck when we're putting together the story for The Mandalorian, I think there's some really cool aspects of Thrawn's story from Legends that they could pull from. And I also think that we're already starting to see some of what happened in Legends starting to happen now in canon, which I do think is dope. So if we look at Thrawn's story in Legends, Palpatine sent Thrawn into the unknown regions. Just like in canon, Thrawn was a Grand Admiral. He was sent into the unknown regions in roughly 4 ABY. So right before the events of Return of the Jedi and the Battle of Endor, he was sent to the unknown regions to pacify that part of the galaxy, and which is where Thrawn stayed up until about 8 ABY. So if we're comparing that to canon, what the story that's taken place in The Mandalorian is happening in 9 ABY. So right around that same time period. So in Legends, Thrawn reemerges back into the known galaxy in 8 ABY, and he begins to take control of the remaining shattered Imperial forces that were operating. And his hope was, hey, I'm going to consolidate my power. I'm going to bring all of these splintered Imperial forces under my control, and I'm going to crush the New Republic. With the Empire on the verge of collapse, Thrawn began the process of rebuilding it by uniting the fragmented elements and of the Empire, and then assuming command of the Imperial military. So he was controlling the Imperial military in Legends. And I think that's exactly what Thrawn's doing currently in canon, because that makes the most sense, right? It would absolutely then set Thrawn up to be a serious threat to the New Republic. And that could mean that he could then be an overarching villain in The Mandalorian. He could be a villain in Ahsoka, which I think at the bare minimum, he's going to be a villain in the Ahsoka series because we know Ahsoka is looking for him. But he could also potentially be a villain in the Skeleton Crew series, which I don't know when exactly that series is dropping. It might be at the end of 2023, beginning of 2024. Not 100% sure, but either way, if we follow the same sort of story in Legends, or I should say Lucasfilm follows the same sort of story in Legends, that would then set Thrawn up to be an imposing adversary to people like Din, Bo-Katan maybe, Luke, Ahsoka, all of these heroes that are operating during this time period. He would be a serious threat to them, and he could be a villain that we see span multiple series, which I think it would be pretty cool. Let me make this a little bit bigger. I actually did a video last week talking about how I think that Dr. Pershing's speech and how he's talking about the cloning that he was doing and the experimentation and the work that he was doing for the Empire, I think that was more of a clue that Thrawn is coming. I think that the cloning experiments that Pershing was conducting was actually at the behest of Grand Admiral Thrawn and not Sidious. Initially, when I'm watching that episode for the first time, I'm hearing Dr. Pershing deliver his speech. I'm like, oh yeah, this makes a ton of sense. He's cloning vessels for Sidious to transfer his essence into so that he could live eternally. But then the more I started thinking about it, I'm like, bro, wait a second here. Sidious is on Exegol. He's been on Exegol for 5 years at this point. How maybe he could be communicating with the Imperial remnant, probably has that capability. I'm pretty sure he did now that I think about it, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that Sidious would have been utilizing resources from the Imperial remnant to create clones, rather than using the Sith Eternal on Exegol to make him clones. So if the Imperial remnant is not making clones for Sidious, well then who the heck are they making clones for? And so this is where I delve into that in the video. So make sure to check that out if you haven't. But essentially, let's make this a little bit smaller. Let's make this bigger. In a nutshell, what I talk about in that video is that in the Legends Thrawn trilogy, a Force-sensitive clone named Joruus C'baoth was created at Mount Tantiss on the planet Wayland. And Joruus C'baoth was a clone for that was made from the Jedi Master Joruus C'baoth. That's the one thing I do not like about the Legends Thrawn trilogy. Joruus C'baoth, basically the name is pretty much exactly the same. The clone name is almost exactly the same as the Jedi Master Joruus C'baoth, except that they added a U to it. And in that series, there was a clone, a Dark Jedi clone of Luke made, and it was Luke with 2 U's, just like the Dark Jedi clone Joruus C'baoth had 2 U's, which I think is so dumb, but minor gripe. So anyway, this Force-sensitive clone Joruus C'baoth is made. He's created at Mount Tantiss while Sidious is still alive, and the Emperor used Joruus C'baoth to be the guardian of his artifacts on Mount Tantiss. Right. So then in 9 ABY, Thrawn he's already back into the known galaxy. He's working on consolidating his power within the Empire, and he discovers the existence of the Imperial storehouse at Mount Tantiss, travels there, and he successfully recruits Joruus C'baoth to join his campaign to obliterate the New Republic, basically. That's what his whole plan was, right? And again, as I mentioned, there is a dark side clone of Luke that's made at Mount Tantiss. There's a lot of weird experimentation and cloning that happened at Mount Tantiss, just like what we're starting to see happen in the Bad Batch with Mount Tantiss. A lot of weird experimentation, a lot of weird cloning happening at Mount Tantiss in canon, which echoes very much what we saw of that Imperial facility in Legends, which I like. I like that. I like the idea that the Empire in I believe it's still 19 BBY season 2 of the Bad Batch. Empire's doing some shady stuff, and in canon, at Mount Tantiss, the Empire was doing shady stuff at Mount Tantiss in Legends. I like that. So not only did Joruus C'baoth play a significant role in the Legends Thrawn trilogy, but so did Mount Tantiss. Mount Tantiss played an integral role in that story. And again, we're starting to see more of Mount Tantiss in canon, and very similar type of facility that we're seeing in canon from what we saw in Legends. Oh, let me go back here for a second. Getting ahead of myself. Now, the Legends Thrawn trilogy is pretty badass. Let's make this a little bit larger. It's a pretty badass story. I like the idea that Thrawn is the person that's in charge of the Imperial remnant. I like the idea that he's hopefully going to appear in The Mandalorian. We know most likely he's going to at least appear in the Ahsoka series. And that cloning experiments that are being done, that Dr. Pershing was conducting, weren't for Sidious, but were for a dark Jedi that Thrawn could use in his fight against the New Republic. That would be so dope, because then think about it, right? If, let's say, Thrawn creates a Force-sensitive dark Jedi that he could use, that he could wield at his disposal whenever he wants to fight against the New Republic, well, then that could necessitate the story having to bring maybe Ahsoka Tano into the story, Luke Skywalker, Ezra Bridger, possibly. It opens up a lot for the story makers and the developers of this series to say, hey, if we bring a Dark Jedi into this story, that then allows us the opportunity to bring a light side Force user into the story so that they can go toe to toe with Thrawn. And what we're seeing right now, I really think then that opens up the door again for Ahsoka, for Luke, for Ezra to appear and to play a large role in fighting Thrawn. To me, the more I think about it, the more I dwell on this, the more I'm like, yo, this is sick. This would be so dope for Lucasfilm to do this. Lucasfilm doesn't have to pluck every single thing from the Legends Thrawn trilogy and bring that into The Mandalorian. You could kind of pick and choose what elements of that story you want to canonize, you want to bring into canon and incorporate that into the stories that are taking place, again, in The Mandalorian and all these other Disney Plus series. I think it opens up a lot of doors for the story to go a lot of different ways. And I also think that a lot of fans would be super pumped about that. There's a large number of people that really, really like the Legends Thrawn trilogy. And I think that you would be making those fans happy. For folks that have not read the Legends Thrawn trilogy, you would be introducing them to some cool storylines and plot points. So I just think it makes a lot of sense. I think it would be a ton of fun. I think it would make for some really great storytelling. And again, I think a lot of fans would be very on board with Lucasfilm taking the story in that direction. I don't know. I could be wrong, but I think, and it seems that a lot of Star Wars fans are thinking the same way, that Lucasfilm is setting up Thrawn as the main villain that we're going to see during this time period. Because again, I just think it makes a lot of sense. I think it opens up the door for so much in the way of badass storytelling. And again, I think a lot of fans that are fans of Thrawn would be very pumped. I really enjoy Thrawn. He's an excellent character. So I think the more we get to see Thrawn on screen, the more I would be happy. So to sum everything up, I think Thrawn is currently in the process of rebuilding the Empire. He's working on uniting all of these fragmented elements of the Imperial remnant, trying to bring them under his control so that he can assume sole command of the Imperial military. And I think he might be attempting to create a Force-sensitive Dark Jedi clone. I could be wrong, but I think that is something that Thrawn's doing, because again, that was something we saw in Legends. Although he didn't create Jorah Sabaoth, he used that Dark Jedi clone. I think that could be something he could be doing. I just think the Legends Thrawn makes a lot of sense story-wise, and I think it opens up a lot of possibilities. So sign me up. I'm all for more Thrawn. Damien, welcome to the chat, my friend. Could we see Thrawn in the next episode? I'm assuming you're referring to The Mandalorian. I don't. So, all right, let me back up here for a second. Potentially, but I don't think it would be the very next episode. I think if we were to get a Thrawn reveal, that's a big reveal. I think Lucasfilm understands that. They understand that fans would lose their minds if we get a Thrawn reveal. And because of that, I think it would wind up being a reveal, a season finale kind of reveal. Kind of like we got with season 1 when Moff Gideon cut his way out of the downed tie with the Darksaber. I think it would be that kind of reveal where it's just a very quick, like 10-30 second scene, and the last shot is Thrawn, like in a commander's chair or something along those lines, setting up what's coming down the line and setting up excitement in fans, kind of like what we've seen them do, what Disney has done with Marvel when they've kind of planted seeds for other characters. Or it could even be kind of like how Marvel introduced Kang into the MCU in Loki. I loved how they did the Kang introduction in Loki. I thought it was so dope. I would be all about it, but I think that sort of reveal Lucasfilm is going to hang on in their back pocket. That's like a season finale kind of nugget, because that's just such a big thing for fans that I can't see them bringing that into the middle of the season, especially when we've got a lot going on right now with the Mandalorians, with Bo-Katan, with Din, the armor, Paz a little bit, right? Right now the season is really focused on the Mandalorians and them rebuilding their presence in the galaxy and kind of hopefully reuniting. So I don't think we would get a Thrawn reveal anytime sooner before the season finale if we were to get a Thrawn reveal. All right, let's move and groove, my friends. Oh, excuse my background, my desktop background. All right, so there we go. Sticking with Thrawn. Again, loving the Thrawn questions. For our next question, Kalen asks, have you read the canon Thrawn books? As a matter of fact, I have. I've read pretty much every canon Thrawn book, except for the final novel in the Ascendancy trilogy, which is the prequel trilogy for Thrawn. I had the book. It's on my bookshelf. I pre-ordered it when it was announced, and it came to my house the day it was released, and it's just been sitting there. I haven't read it. I'll read it at some point. I got to be honest, I kind of lost interest in that trilogy after reading Lesser Evil, which is the second novel in the Ascendancy trilogy. So at some point I'll get to the third one. What is it called? I can't remember what the third novel is. I can't remember what the third one is off the top of my head. It'll come to me, but I'll get to it at some point. But the first canon Thrawn novel, and that book is titled simply Thrawn, is incredible. It is so damn good. I absolutely love that novel from start to finish. It is fantastic. That's a book. I get these questions a lot. What book should I start with in canon? Or do you have any canon books that you recommend? Or what's your favorite canon books? I always say the first Thrawn novel. It's an excellent place to start if you have not read books, because it's such a fast-paced novel, and I love that the book you jump between chapters from Thrawn's perspective, and then Arinda Pryce, Governor Pryce. You also get to learn about her backstory, and so you're jumping between one chapter or maybe two chapters is going to be about Thrawn. Now we're jumping to Arinda Pryce's story, so it's really great because it gives you this fast-paced story. And if you're kind of not so feeling this part of Thrawn's story, well, the next chapter is going to be about Arinda Pryce. It is such a fantastic novel. I cannot recommend it enough. And if you're a fan of comics, Marvel actually released a comic book series that is the first canon Thrawn novel, which is really dope because if you're more of a visual, if you enjoy more like visual mediums, then I would definitely recommend the Thrawn comic. So that novel is so dope, I can't recommend it enough. After that, though, I got to be honest with you, I think a lot of the Thrawn novels, canon novels, kind of fall flat for me. They are kind of books that I had to struggle to get through. They just kind of didn't do it for me. And they're probably not going to be books that I'll revisit. Thrawn Alliances was okay for me. It was kind of cool seeing Anakin and Thrawn team up together. It was cool to see Anakin during the Clone Wars when we're getting that story. But I didn't think that book was anything special. I felt like at times it was kind of lackluster and a little boring for me. I did like Thrawn Treasons better than Thrawn Alliances. That felt a little bit more fast-paced to me than Alliances did. But again, I didn't think that book was all that amazing. The Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy has been much of the same. I haven't found it to be really a series that I've enjoyed all that much. Usually when I start a book, there's only been one book in my entire life where I've started and I was like, bro, I can't finish this book. It is so boring. It is not engaging me whatsoever. I gotta stop. That I've never started a book and not finished it before, just the one time. So even with the Thrawn books, even though they're not necessarily my jam, when I start them, I gotta finish them. And I say this because with the same thing with a book series, if I'm going to start a book series, I've got to finish it. So at some point, I'll get back into that Ascendancy Trilogy series. So that series centers around Thrawn's origins, basically. So it's kind of like a prequel book series to the canon, the first trilogy, canon Thrawn trilogy. It takes place in the Chiss Ascendancy, which Thrawn, he's his species is the Chiss, and they operate in the unknown regions. Their empire basically is called the Chiss Ascendancy. So you get to learn about Thrawn's time rising through the ranks. What is in the Chiss military? And I'm drawing a blank. Is it the Chiss Expansionary Force? I can't remember exactly. But he's basically rising up in the ranks in the Chiss Ascendancy. And the first novel, Chaos Rising, had some cool moments for me. I thought that novel, I probably enjoyed Chaos Rising more so than Thrawn Alliances. I don't know if I would say I enjoyed it more than Thrawn Treasons, but it had some good moments. It had some really fun moments, and then some moments where I was like, oh, come on. Can we just move on to another part of the story? The second novel in that series is called Greater Good. That was very difficult for me. I'm not going to lie. That book was difficult for me to get through. There was one character who's kind of like the villain who I absolutely loved. I thought was such a dope character, and you find out there's kind of like a big reveal with the character at the end of the book, and we find out like what their motivations are and what they're doing and why they're doing it, which I thought was dope, but I wanted more of that. And that character is kind of ruthless, and I wanted to see more of that. I understand why Timothy Zahn, who's the author of all the Thrawn novels, why he didn't do it, but that was like the one part of the story that I really enjoyed, and then the rest of it kind of was just like not really my thing. The third novel, Lesser Evil, that's what it's called, Lesser Evil. Haven't read that one yet, but again, at some point I'll get to it. I'll read it. Hopefully it'll be a little bit more enjoyable than some of the other Thrawn books for me. But, you know, there is so many novels and so many comics that I read that I don't like bat an eye if I consume a Star Wars story that I don't enjoy. So if it's a book, if it's a comic, even if it's a movie, I can't guys, I'm like trying as hard as I can to consume every single canon release. So comics, books, shows, the movies, like I try to consume everything. And there is so much. It is so hard for me to keep up with everything. So if there's a book or a comic that's like not my cup of tea or not my jam, I'm just like, all right, I didn't really enjoy it too much, but that's all right. I'm not gonna go crazy about it. So that's how I feel about the Thrawn trilogy. It's not my cup of tea. The first novel is like insanely incredible and amazing. After that, it's not the best, but that's all right. I've got tons of other Star Wars stories to dive into. The one gripe I do have, though, with the Thrawn books, and I think this might be more of a gripe with Dave Filoni and the creators of Rebels. Thrawn in the books is much less villainous and much less malevolent and ruthless than how he's depicted in Rebels. Like, Thrawn is almost like Timothy Zahn kind of depicts him almost as like, I don't know if anti-hero would be the best way to describe how Timothy Zahn depicts him, but that might be the best way to describe him. Like, Thrawn's not super evil in the novels. And that's one thing I will say that kind of stinks. My one gripe, and I think this has more to do with Dave Filoni, but I get it, right? If you're bringing a character on screen who's going to be working with the Imperials, working with Sidious and the Empire, probably got to be depicted on screen as a villain. I can understand it, but that's the one gripe I will say that I have with the books, or with the Thrawn character, but I think that's more of Dave Filoni and the writers and creators of Rebels rather than Timothy Zahn. But yeah, the first Thrawn novel, can't recommend it enough. It is straight fire. It's so damn good. Umbre Militos, welcome, my friend. I answered your question, so make sure if you're just getting into the chat now that you peep the beginning of the stream, because I answered your question earlier. All right, let's move and groove, my friends. Let's get on to our next question. So next up, Damien Para asks, do you think we'll ever get a series or a movie regarding the events around the destruction of the second Death Star? I'm inclined to say no. And I say this because we've gotten a lot of stories, not necessarily on screen, that take place after the events of Return of the Jedi and the Battle of Endor. So we've gotten the Aftermath trilogy, Alphabet Squadron trilogy. Those are book trilogies. The Princess and the Scoundrel is set right after the events of Return of the Jedi. There is Battlefront 2. We've got a lot of stuff. The Aftermath and Alphabet Squadron trilogies, they provide a ton of insight and information about the Alliance's defeat over the Empire and then the burgeoning New Republic. I haven't read the Princess and the Scoundrel yet. I keep that book. There's another book I pre-ordered. It arrived at my house the day it was released. And I'm like, I'm going to read that book next. Once I finish whatever Star Wars book I was reading at the time, I'm jumping right into The Princess and the Scoundrel. Then I got 2 High Republic books that came. I'm like, oh my God, I got to read the High Republic books. I just got Battle Scars. So I'm finishing now. I'm almost done with the High Republic Battle of Jeddah. Once I finish that, now I want to read Battle Scars because next month, the Jedi Survivor's dropping. So I'm like, I probably should read Battle Scars before I play Jedi Survivor. So at some point, I'll read The Princess and the Scoundrel. I haven't read it yet. But again, that novel takes place after the Battle of Endor. And I'm assuming we're learning about the New Republic, how they were operating, or at least, what was going on with the New Republic during that time period. So for video games, Star Wars Squadrons, Battlefront 2, both of those games take place right after the events of Return of the Jedi. So we've got, again, a lot of content that dives into it, not necessarily shows or movies that dive into the time period after Return of the Jedi, but we've got a lot of books. We've got 2 video games. So that's why, for me, I find it hard to believe that we're going to get a series or a movie that's going to take place right after the events of Return of the Jedi. Usually, not always, but usually, if Lucasfilm is going to be releasing comics or books about a specific story or a specific character, or maybe even a specific time period, typically that tends to mean that Lucasfilm has no plans to explore that on screen. So that's something to consider. I also think that, because The Mandalorian and these live action shows are taking place only a few years after the events of Return of the Jedi, I feel like it seems very unlikely to me that Lucasfilm would create a series that would dive into the time period immediately following Return of the Jedi, or let's say immediately after the Battle of Jakku, when the Empire has technically been defeated, because as far as we know right now, like, yeah, there was still things that the New Republic needed to do to come into power. There was still some conflict happening throughout the galaxy, but by and large, the Empire is kind of defeated in 5 ABY. They've signed the Galactic Concordance. They are officially defeated. So after that point, I don't think story-wise there would be a ton to explore on screen. Between 4 to 5 ABY would make sense. Between the end of the Battle of Endor to the Battle of Jakku, that makes sense for something on screen. But I think because there's been so many books and now 2 video games that specifically dive into that year or less than a year time frame, that Lucasfilm would probably be hesitant to release something like a Disney Plus series or a movie that takes place after the Battle of Endor. It just seems more likely that they're going to stick with the time period of The Mandalorian, so like 9 ABY. I think the only exception to that might be the High Republic. High Republic right now is just strictly a publishing initiative, but there's going to be the Acolyte that we know is going to take place at the very end of the High Republic. I think we are going to get some stories on screen that are going to take place during the period of time that Phase 1 and possibly Phase 3 of the High Republic takes place. So if I remember correctly, I think Phase 1 of the High Republic takes place in 232 BBY is when Light of the Jedi takes place. And then you figure it's probably, I think, like a year goes by from the beginning of Phase 1 to the end. I think it's roughly a year. So we'll say somewhere to like 232 to 230 BBY, we'll call it. Maybe I could see a series on Disney Plus or a movie that dives into that time period, which we just got some news that Damon Lindelof, who was apparently writing some Star Wars movies or a Star Wars movie, is out of whatever that project was. Apparently the director for that film is still in, but Lindelof is out, which Lucasfilm, man, all these movie rumors and announcements, like, oh damn, it's like one thing after the next. Bull Run, my man, welcome to the chat. Glad you're joining us. Johan, welcome to the chat. Glad you're joining us. We guys just missed, we were talking about Thrawn, talking about the New Republic, the Empire after the Battle of Endor, and whether we could see a series or a movie that would take place after the Battle of Endor. But let's move on to our final question. So for our last question, SKC asks, is Jek 14 the Force-sensitive clone canon? So I got to be honest with you, I had no clue who the hell Jek 14 was until I got this question. I don't play the Star Wars Lego games. I haven't watched any of the Star Wars Lego shows, or I don't know if there's been movies that release. I know we've gotten like the Star Wars specials where they've been Star Wars Legos. I watched the one Christmas one. Not really my thing. So I was unfamiliar with Jek 14 initially, but I wound up reading up on Jek 14. I'm like, bro, this is kind of cool. So for those unfamiliar with Jek 14, just like I was, they appeared in the non-canon animated Lego Star Wars The Yoda Chronicles. And I think was that like 2015-ish, I think I read is when that came out, 2015, 2016, right around there. And in that series, he was a clone trooper that was created by Count Dooku during the Clone Wars. He was Force sensitive, and he was used to make an army of Sith clones, among other things. So a bunch of other stuff happens in Jek 14's story, but in a nutshell, he was this Force-sensitive clone that Sidious used to then make an army of Sith clones. Now, that story is non-canon. It's not in the current canon. However, Jek 14 I'm happy to relay is a canon character and has appeared in a canon release. So Aq 14 appeared in canon in the 2018 reference book Star Wars Droidography. That's a book I have not read. I haven't read. I'm starting to accumulate more reference books and visual dictionaries because I always find them super interesting. Whenever my wife and I go to bookstores, I'll usually, if there's a reference book or a visual dictionary, I'll usually take a look at those, and I wind up reading them for far longer than I thought I would. So I'm starting to accumulate more reference books and visual dictionaries, but the Star Wars Droidography is one I have not read. Now, for Aq 14, his canon story, just like in the Lego series, he's Force sensitive. However, it hasn't been stated that he's a clone in canon, just that he was Force sensitive. And the reference book also mentions that Aq 14 met the Freemakers family, who are the main cast in the non-canon Lego Star Wars series, the Freemaker Adventures. And so, even though that series, the Freemaker Adventures, is not canon, the Freemakers actually are canon, which I didn't know that either. I had no clue that the Freemakers were canon until I got this question. I know of the Freemakers because I've seen them. I've seen people talk about them, and I've seen them referenced in other stuff, and that Lego series referenced before. But I didn't I figured, it's Legos, that's not canon, whatever. I had no clue that the Freemakers are also canon, which I'm sure if you're a Legos fan, like if I was a Star Wars Legos fan, I'd be pumped. I'd be like, hell yeah, Aq 14 and the Freemakers are canon. I think if Danny Girl and I had kids, I would probably be more into the Lego Star Wars stuff. I feel like that's just more for a younger audience. So typically not my jam, but SKC, Aq 14 is canon. So hopefully you're happy about that. Hopefully you like Aq 14 and that's why you wanted to know. So Johan says, I have not read any Star Wars books since the Rogue Squadron book series. So bro, I was just diving into the Thrawn trilogy. So I've read a ton of Star Wars books. People will dunk on canon, but dude, there are a ton of excellent Star Wars novels. The Thrawn novel is excellent. It's so good, especially if you've read the Thrawn Legends stuff. Read the first canon one at the bare minimum, because that's a really cool story, and it's so much fun. It was such an easy read. It was so I crushed that book so fast. Shadow of the Sith takes place. I can't remember what year it takes place. Shadow of the Sith is all about Luke Skywalker's time. His Jedi Order has been created. I think it's like 20 ABY. So it's maybe like 10, 15 years after the events of Return of the Jedi. One of the best Star Wars books I've read, period. Legends or canon. It is freaking fantastic. Another book I love, Phasma, is so sick. It is so dope. Phasma is absolutely ruthless and brutal in that book. It is so awesome. I'm trying to think, what are some other... if you're a fan of the Clone Wars, a book I will tend to recommend to people is Dark Disciple. What an excellent book. Such a fantastic book. And then the Phase 1 High Republic novels are incredible. Some of the best Star Wars books I've ever read. Light of the Jedi is spectacular. What's the second one in that? I can't remember. It was written by Cavan Scott. I don't want to say... I can't remember what the second one is called by Cavan Scott, but that one is incredible. And then The Fallen Star by Claudia Gray is like amazingly good. It's so good. So yeah, there's a ton of really great canon novels, and then there's a ton of really great Legends novels. I've talked about the Darth Bane trilogy a bunch. I love that trilogy. It's spectacular. Plagueis is an excellent book. The Obi-Wan Kenobi book, is it simply called Kenobi? I think it's called Kenobi. That book is a ton of fun. The Old Republic, if you've played Star Wars: The Old Republic, or if you're a fan of the Old Republic, for the release of Star Wars: The Old Republic video game, there was, I want to say it was like 5 to somewhere between 5 to 10 companion novels that were written about that time period that the game takes place, which I think is like 3000 to 2000 BBY. It's something around some time frame. It's around that time frame. Those books are really fun. I'm actually reading I've never read. I just finished actually the Star Wars: The Old Republic comic series. I did not read it when it initially came out, and I just actually finished it. It's a 6-part series. I kind of like the first 3 comics in that series, but I did not like the art at all. I felt like the art really detracted from the story for me. But the latter portion of that comic series is sick. So good. The art is great. The story is really cool. It's a comic, not a novel, but I would recommend that. I just finished also the Star Wars Legacy comic series. Got mixed feelings about that. There's things that I absolutely love about that comic series, and then there's things I'm like, this is kind of whack. Some of the art too in that comic series I felt like was hit or miss for me, but that's a fun series to read, especially if you want to know more about like the time frame after Return of the Jedi in Legends, what that was like. That story takes place, 150 years, I think, after the events of Return of the Jedi, something along those lines. But yeah, there's so much stuff to read. There's a ton of really great Legends and canon books to read. That's why I'm like, again, going back to what I was saying with the Thrawn trilogy. Yeah, some of those novels might not be my jam, but there is so much Star Wars stuff to read. Like I can't keep up with it. I'm trying to build up my book collection. For the longest time, I would just take books out from the library. And so that's how I wound up reading most of my most Star Wars books, was just taking them out from the library. Well, now I want to have those for my collection. So I put together a list of Star Wars books that I want to buy that I haven't read, or even ones that I have read. I want to say there's something like 100 books on that list. There's so many books, and I'm going to get every single one of them at some point. I'm going to buy every single one of them. But yeah, there's so many different Star Wars stories that you can read, both in book form or in comics, which is dope. But I think that is a good place to leave it, my friends. I am on the fence about possibly doing a live stream of me building my first freaking PC. I just got all of the parts for a PC build that I'm going to be putting together. And I'm debating whether or not I want to live stream that, because I know when I get angry, the New Yorker in me comes out, and I get very angry. And I feel like this is my first time building a PC. There's probably going to be stuff going wrong. I'm probably going to lose my cool quickly. And there's probably going to be things I'll need to look up. So I'm like, do I want to stream it? Do I not? I'm on the fence. I might stream at maybe some of me building my first gaming rig. I'm like so freaking pumped about that. So hopefully within the next week, 2 weeks, I will have a brand new gaming rig, and I'm freaking pumped about it. So I might be doing a stream about that. But at the bare minimum, we've got shorts that we drop pretty much daily at this point. Videos that I've been getting back into releasing videos. And then Danny Girl and we do breakdowns for The Mandalorian. We try to mix some Bad Batch in there as well, primarily just because of our schedules and our time. It's kind of tough to do 2 breakdowns of The Mandalorian, live streams of The Mandalorian and The Bad Batch. So we just stick to one, but we got that. So if you haven't subscribed to Star Wars Transmissions, Follow us on TikTok. I got a TikTok, SW Transmissions. You could check that out as well. Now's a good time if you have not. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. Let me know down in the comments whether you think I'm a knucklehead for any of my answers to these questions. If you disagree with me or if you agree with anything that I had to say, let me know down in the comments. Always appreciate the love and the support that you guys give me for the channel. It's super dope. So yeah, follow the channel on TikTok again if you haven't at SW Transmissions. So with that said, my friends, oh crap, I completely forgot to show you guys. This is Jack 14. I'm like in the zone. I was in the zone. I completely forgot to show you guys what Jack 14 looks like. This is our boy Jack 14. This is what he looked like in the Yoda Chronicles. My bad. But I'm going to go watch the Rangers. I'm hoping they're not losing to the Carolina Hurricanes. Right before I was getting ready to stream, it was tied at 0, but they lost on Tuesday to the Hurricanes. So hopefully they're in the lead, because I need the Rangers to win so they could hopefully continue to climb, or I shouldn't say continue, but climb up the frickin' standings ladder, because season's winding down and there's not too much time left. So hopefully the Rangers are doing well. With that said, my friends, thank you for watching. May the Force be with you, and stay nerdy.